Thank you, Dr. Chip Fletcher. The first question is this. No matter how Hawaii or the world responds to the threat of continued greenhouse gas emissions, we in Hawaii will most likely experience the effects of sea level rise, more extreme heat waves, rain bombs, and hurricanes. How do we get the decision makers in Hawaii, state, and counties to understand that we need to start preparing our infrastructure for such events? The changes needed cannot be made overnight. Put differently, is Hawaii doing enough to adapt to the inevitable sea level rise? What can and should it do?
So voting is the answer. I would also say protesting on the streets is part of the answer. And actually getting to those candidate forums where during the course of running for office, they appear and, either from people's living rooms to more public and open venues, make themselves available to address questions. Show up at these and hit them with hard questions because you're informed about this issue. Find out the level of their knowledge and find out what their plans are for solving these problems, right? So visit them during the run for office, vote for the right people, and then, let's get out on the streets like we did prior to 2020, and let's have some serious civil, nonviolent disobedience.
Thank you. And I'll read you the next question, which is, I'm going to read it exactly. Chip, what's the impact of climate change on global agriculture? What does the effect of the unstable jet stream with heat waves moving north and cold moving south in unpredictable manners do to our farm crops in the USA?
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, agriculture, as I've mentioned, is a driver of climate change, but it is also exposed to extreme weather events and vulnerable to, declining yields and, in fact, breadbasket collapse during any particular year. And there are a number of papers that have come out on this issue of breadbasket collapse. Just to summarize, it turns out that the global food system is robust enough to withstand the collapse of a single average breadbasket, right? I mean, we have everything from the Central Valley of California, which is relatively small, to the steppe region of Russia, where we have massive wheat fields and cornfields. If you take your median breadbasket, the global food system can absorb the shock of a single failure during a particular year, Northern Hemisphere summer, perhaps due to a heat wave. But the food system is not capable of absorbing the shock of two simultaneous breadbasket failures. And Hawaii is at the tail end of the global food distribution system. And if food becomes in short supply, either because it's literally in short volumetric availability or in short supply because of a spike in the cost, Hawaii is not going to be receiving food. And if we do receive it, it's not going to be the healthy stuff. So most of you are aware of the need for Hawaii to increase our internal food production. There was a great piece yesterday in Civil Beat about this, and it looks like there's some nice action taking place along those lines. Thanks.
Thank you. That's pretty sobering.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I will ask the next question. Given the dire state of affairs you have presented, how do you continue to move forward? What motivates you to act rather than put your head in the sand and give up?
My wife is over here giving me advice. This is a very real question. And in fact, ecological grief is actually a real psychological effect. There's a paper on the rise of ecological grief that was published in Nature magazine several years ago. And it concludes that scientists who study climate change are the first population to experience this grief. And, you know, having experienced it myself now for over a decade, there's this classical set of stages associated with grief that you go through. And the first is denial. And as a paleoclimatologist, I denied climate change back in the 80s. I'm well aware of the coming and going of ice ages and warm periods. And I thought, oh, this is just, you know, part of a cycle. And then I saw Al Gore's first movie, and I just sort of hit myself on the side of the head and said, what am I doing? I need to study this issue a lot more carefully. So you go through denial and anger, and I think eventually, you know, arguing and eventually acceptance. But a great piece came out in, I think it might have been the Sunday New York Times or maybe the Sunday Washington Post just about a month ago about the despair associated with climate change reality. And it concluded with embrace your despair. Yes, this is real, and it's as bad and probably worse than you know. And then step into the hope. That is your next action. Step into that hope. And it's by doing things. And for me, it's by talking, by sharing, by teaching. It's by doing things that you create your own hope.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's also it's a nonprofit called Good Grief Network that does a 10-step program to address exactly all of what you're talking about. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know a lot of us here in Hawaii have gone through reef grief when we found out that, you know, there's a really good chance we're going to lose all the warm water corals. So I'll go into the next question though. When this is agriculture related, when you discuss the need for cover plants in agriculture, do you mean the concept of intercropping?
You know, I haven't heard that term, but that must be what it is. It's simultaneously planting ground cover with your food crops. And the ground cover, you know, it prevents the aeration and the drying of the soil. It can put key nutrients back into the soil that your food crops can take out, nitrogen, phosphorus. Plus the ground cover adds to the root structure of the soil, which is the beginning of where the carbon enters the soil biome. So I think it's intercropping, yeah. But that description is what I'm referring to.
Thank you.
All right, this is probably the last question. We're running up to the end here. Can you discuss deep adaptation as a concept and your feelings about it?
So deep adaptation comes from a paper, and then there was a second edition several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where it says, you know, if you really look into this issue, the author of that paper concluded that we're not going to get out of this problem. We need to learn to live with this problem. And the paper goes on to describe the creation of what he refers to as lifeboat communities. And I kind of like this concept of lifeboat communities because I think it can apply to Hawaii. A lifeboat community is one that is unified, that has food, energy, resilience, obviously water, a community that is prepared, that gets along, that works in a unified manner to remain healthy. And one of the things that Hawaii has in its favor is that it's not on a continent and it doesn't share a border, because it's this human migration problem that we have seen in the European Union lead to the rise of authoritarian candidates for office. In fact, Brexit is rooted in the flow of Syrian and North African immigrants into the United Kingdom, because as a member of the EU, borders are porous. And the voters in the UK voted to leave the EU in order to have more border control because of this influx. We saw Sebastian Kurz, the president of Austria, actually get elected to office on a campaign of outlawing the wearing of religious clothing, ejecting those who practiced Islam, closing the borders, these sorts of authoritarian actions with regard to the border. So at the same time that Hawaii will likely not see this level of a border problem, it comes with other issues like we are responsible for our own freshwater conservation and food production, et cetera. But anyway, my answer about deep adaptation is that no, I do not agree with the idea that we give in to this problem. This problem has no goal line. This problem does not have a point at which we have lost. This will remain a perpetual problem until we truly undergo transformational change in everything that I talked about, energy to food.